Turkish Airlines presents Business Africa.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Business Africa. I'm your host, Afolake Oyiloye. The top business stories this week. Post-election unrest disrupts businesses in Douala and pushes families to the brink as economic toll deepens. Africa targets $90 billion infrastructure gap. The Luanda summit backs the 5% agenda, calling for greater domestic investment to unlock sustainable development. From farm to roof, we explore how mycelium-based building panels are reshaping Nairobi's housing sector and reducing carbon emissions in construction. Post-election protests have brought the Cameroonian capital, Douala, to a grounding halt. Businesses are slowing down and the cost of basic commodities continues to rise. Economists warn the city is losing over 10 billion CFA franc every day. Take a look.
Douala has taken on the appearance of a ghost town in recent days. The post-election violence has left significant scars in several neighborhoods of the city. Closed shops, burnt out gas stations, vandalized buildings, closed travel agencies. In short, the economic capital has been paralyzed for nearly a week. The impacts are considerable, with residents being the primary victims of the crisis. For example, finding bread in Douala requires a lot of patience. You have to queue in the few bakeries that are open. I came to buy bread. Truly, since the crisis started, we are suffering. People are suffering. Finding bread has become a problem. Even if you find bread, you have to line up and wait. Finding bread is not easy because of the lines. In the markets, it is the same scenario. Few merchants dare to open their stalls. The prices of basic necessities have skyrocketed in just a few days. With the main supply routes cut off, merchants are struggling to restock.
Since the start of the crisis, it's been extremely worrying. The markets have been deserted since Monday. The streets are empty. Today was the first time shop owners tried to return or reopen their stores, but there's almost nothing to eat.
According to economists, the city is losing over 10 billion CFA francs per day due to the crisis, while tensions persist. A situation that is causing fear as millions of residents struggle to eat.
To help us unpack the economic implications, we are joined by Michael Kwam, an economist from Cameroon. Thank you for joining us on the show. Tell us, what has been the immediate economic impact of the post-election protest in Cameroon?
For the moment, we can only make projections because the dust has certainly not yet fully settled. But already, based on the initial assessments we can make, port activity was essentially slowed down, which represented a major loss of revenue for the country. In addition, the transport sector, which makes up the bulk of the economy in our economic capital, including the movement of goods and people, and the activities linked to these, were also affected. When we aggregate all of this, we can say that it resulted in a significant loss because port activity alone generates around 1 billion per day. If we add that to the inactivity of individuals and businesses combined, we can easily estimate losses in the billions, even double-digit billions.
Which groups are the most affected by the fallout, and how is it worsening existing inequality on ground?
First, the lowest social class is made up of people who must survive on a day-to-day basis. Among them, we have Bensikna, those who operate motorcycle taxis, that's what we call them, and also the Bayam Selam, literally women who buy goods and resell them in the market. This means that if they do not go out, they cannot earn a living. To this group, we must also add laborers, the working class, who carry out informal jobs and must go out to work in order to earn an income. When these activities were brought to a halt, it created a major loss because they do not have income stability. This also widened inequalities between them and those who were better prepared, notably the middle class and even the upper class, who had time to prepare for such periods of crisis and were able to build up reserves. Unfortunately, this was not the case for the groups I have just described, and they are the ones who suffered the most.
How might Cameroon's instability affect regional trade and growth?
Regarding transport and logistics flows, you can see that landlocked countries such as the Central African Republic and Chad are heavily dependent on Cameroon for their imports. The fact that transportation came to a standstill affected them, and it may even lead them to seek alternative routes. If they do find alternative routes, it will be to the detriment of Cameroon, which will suffer financially. As for a country like Gabon, it is important to note that for a long time, we believed Cameroon was the one supplying Gabon with most goods, that without Cameroon, Gabon could not survive. But the situation is changing. Since 2018, we have seen a slight trade deficit, and this deficit can be explained by the fact that Cameroon now imports mainly from Gabon processed wood, rice, palm oil, among others, in exchange for fruits and fresh produce from Cameroon, which are already being questioned in terms of the treatment they undergo. So overall, if this situation persists, Cameroon will lose out to the benefit of a country like Gabon.
Mr. Kwam, thank you so much for those insights.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Africa faces an annual infrastructure financing gap of up to $90 billion, costing the continent around 2% of potential GDP growth each year. A renewed push from the Luanda summit aims to close the gap by mobilizing domestic capital through the 5% agenda.
Africa faces a major infrastructure gap. The continent needs $130 to $170 billion a year, but only $80 billion is invested. This leaves an annual shortfall of $90 billion, costing Africa 2% in potential GDP growth. The recently concluded Luanda Summit for Africa's Infrastructure Development set an ambitious target to use the 5% agenda to unlock domestic resources and fill this gap. Attended by over 2,000 African heads of state, investors and development partners, commitments were made for up to $18 billion in investments. Under the agenda, African institutional investors, including pension and sovereign wealth funds, are compelled to increase their infrastructure allocation from its current low of under 2.7% to a minimum of 5% of their total assets under management. This could unlock an estimated $100 billion for development. The capital raised will be deployed strategically, $25 billion targeted at integrated transport corridors, $15 billion for power and $1.2 billion for digital infrastructure. With most African governments currently allocating only 3 to 4% of GDP to infrastructure, the message from Luanda is simple. Africa needs to move beyond aid and mobilize its own vast resources to fund its future and secure the success of the African Continental Free Trade Area.
A Kenyan startup is turning mushrooms into construction materials, developing eco-friendly insulation panels made from mycelium and sugarcane waste. The innovation promises greener, healthier and more affordable homes, offering a fresh solution to Nairobi's housing shortage and reducing carbon footprints.
Nairobi is growing fast, but so is its housing crisis. Now, a Kenyan startup believes an unlikely natural ingredient could help build cheaper, greener homes, mushrooms. At this workshop outside Nairobi, Tile turns mycelium, the root structure of mushrooms, into insulation blocks. They mix fungi with sugarcane waste known as bagasse, sourced from sugar factories that struggle to dispose of it. Once colonized, the panels are dried and ready to install in walls, roofs and interiors.
In Kenya alone, the housing industry is suffering an 80% deficit, where only 50,000 housing units are supplied against a 250,000 demand per year. So as Mycotile offering an affordable solution, and there is already an existing market that we are tapping into.
The construction sector contributes nearly 40% of global carbon emissions. Mycotile says its product locks carbon into buildings and cuts energy use for heating and cooling while replacing imported materials with the natural, locally made ones. In Nairobi's informal sector of Kibera, residents using the panel say they already feel the difference.
However, this place is good enough and livable. It's neither cold at night nor hot during the day.
Sustainability experts say bio-based building materials also reduce exposure to harmful chemicals.
Mycelium help you to have a built indoor environment that is quite safe because it's much close to the nature. You don't have this exposure to harmful chemicals.
As Nairobi's skyline continues to rise, innovators hope fungi could form a greener foundation for Africa's future homes.
And that's all for this edition of Business Africa. Thank you for watching. For more business stories and updates, stay tuned to Africanews or visit us online at africanews.com. See you soon.
Business Africa was presented by Turkish Airlines.